Welcome to the launch of the DMU Willows Centre for Primary Care Research. My name is Dr. Tariq Kapasi. I'm a general practitioner, medical director of Willows Health and honorary associate professor of primary care. I'm also privileged to co-chair this centre with Professor Bertha Ochieng. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to join us today, and I suspect everybody who's joining us today we will be working with at some point in the future. Before we get to the core of the conversation today, I thought it would be prudent to share something about the two organisations from which this collaborative partnership is formed. This is an exciting collaborative partnership between two impactful organisations in the UK. De Montfort University is a dynamic, leading 21st century university. It's a leader in cutting-edge research in artificial intelligence, data ethics, cybersecurity, and health and social care, all of which will be key to the way healthcare is managed in the future. Willows Health is one of the most innovative practice groups in the country. We serve approximately 45,000 patients and are committed to providing the best medical healthcare available. Willows has an academy for education and research, and such a collaboration allows for research to be put into impactful practice. Today marks a significant milestone for all of those involved with the Research Centre, and in truth, it's been years in the making. The Centre ultimately aims to help improve the health and well-being of people's lives by considering the wider determinants of health. As a schedule for today's launch, we're going to have a few words from our steering group, and then we're going to move on to our speakers who will be integral to the way the Centre will function for the future. Our speaker list today includes Professor Mayur Lakhani, CBE, Mr. Eric Killstrom, and Professor Bertha Ochieng. So without further ado, we're going to start today's proceedings by talking to two vital members of the steering group, Professor David Mbar and Professor Rishabh Prasad. I do wish to actually introduce both of them and give you a short biography. So Professor Mbar is Pro-Vice Chancellor of De Montfort University. He studied aerospace engineering and completed a PhD in mechanical engineering, for which he was awarded the Lord King Norton Gold Medal for the most outstanding doctoral thesis. Professor Mbar's current research is focused on machine condition monitoring, fault diagnosis, model-based prognostics, and machine performance prediction. He has published over 250 journal and conference papers. In 2010, he was awarded the Ludwig Mohn Prize in recognition of the best contribution to the progress of mechanical engineering of interest to the chemical industry. He has established innovation centres in robotics and advanced materials at TWI Cambridge and overseen several apprenticeship programmes at different institutions. He'll be joined by Professor Rishabh Prasad, who is a Professor of Digital Medicine. He's founded the Digital Healthcare Unit at the Centre for Primary Care Research, which we are launching today. This was Rishabh's brainchild. With numerous publications, Professor Prasad consults for some of the leading digital health companies in the world. He is an active general practitioner with significant experience of using digital healthcare technology to improve clinical care pathways. He has national and regional experience of commissioning. He is currently chairman of Willows Health. And there's not many people I know who can keep up with the speed of Professor Prasad, and I suspect there's a research study in himself. So without further ado, we'll introduce Professor Prasad and Professor David Mbar.
Tariq, thank you. David, do you want to go first, and then I'll follow on from you?
Yes, great. Hello, and a very warm welcome, everyone. On behalf of De Montfort University and Willows Health Leicester, thank you for joining us today as we launch this exciting new Centre for Primary Care Research. Our university has had a long track record of conducting research that makes a real difference to people's health and well-being, research that has a genuine impact on communities. So as such, as Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research and Enterprise, I'm extremely proud that our institution strives to improve the lives of others through research that has societal impact. Last year, we marked 150 years in education, and over the course of this time, our staff and students have developed long-standing, meaningful relationships within Leicester and its communities. Now, these relationships and that trust will continually drive us to make positive changes in our community and beyond. It is this ethos that has resulted in our new venture with Willows Health, the first in its kind at our university, with both parties making significant investment in our new Center for Primary Care Research. By working together with Willows Health, we have an outstanding opportunity to draw on the academic research strengths and deliver high-quality research and services to inform and support health interventions, practice, and ultimately policy, ensuring people in Leicester can lead healthier, independent lives, which would also have a national and international impact. Now, achieving satisfactory health incomes is dependent on equitable access to care. And during this pandemic, we have seen health inequality across different demographic and socioeconomic groups, caused by a multitude of factors. One of which is that those groups who had historically had inequitable access to care have demonstrated poorer outcomes from complications of COVID. So our ambition is that this center will begin to address these types of challenges, delivering truly impactful outcomes for our wonderfully diverse community. So once again, from a very warm welcome, and I shall pass on to Rish.
Hi, everyone. This, as David and Tarek alluded to, this is a culmination of many years of working together across both organisations. What I want to really do is just spend a few minutes grounding what we do in everyday practice. So this is a sort of a call out to all the clinicians and practitioners on this call, and of which I'm one. Every consultation, every interaction which you have with a patient when you're in a privileged position is food for research. Medicine and nursing, clinical services, they are sciences, but they're not as much arts as well. And every interaction has an element where you are learning about your craft. It is an iterative process. I've been in practice for 12 years, and I think I'm safe. I look to my senior partners, they're good. And the difference between being safe and good, to me, feels almost like 20, 30 years of practice. What I'm hoping we can achieve with this centre is there a shortcut to being good? Can we use some of the expertise, the data, the insights that our senior colleagues, our data tells us, and drive improvements and performance in practice day one? Could I get as good as my senior partners like John Astles, Nitin Joshi and Steve Borley, all these guys who are, years of experience, who just seem to know everything? Could I get to that stage sooner? So really the centre to me I'm really hoping to learn how to become a better clinician as a result. And I really hope that my fellow practitioners share that ambition. I hope the centre to be a practical, translational unit which drives better practice and everyday care. Papers and research will be vital and lifeblood of this, but if we fail to achieve improved care in our patients, I think the centre hasn't achieved its true ambition. Thank you.
Some fabulous reflections there, David and Rishab, and particularly with the health inequality side, Professor Barr. I think this is something that we really wish to work on in the centre. And I think Rishab also reflected on the actual patient consultation and improving ourselves as clinicians. Really impactful. And one example I just wish to reflect on is a patient I spoke to this morning. He was in his 70s, had metastatic prostatic carcinoma. He was of a South Asian background, and he did not wish to accept treatment which could be potentially curative. And it just made me wonder about the health beliefs which are driving that decision and what work we need to do to improve access to healthcare, because it can take many forms. So without further ado, I'm going to move on to our speaker. So the first of three speakers. Our first speaker is Professor Mayur Lakhani, CBE. So Professor Mayur Lakhani is a practicing general practitioner, Chairman of the Faculty of Medical Leadership and Management, Chair of the West Leicestershire CCG, and the past President of the Royal College of General Practitioners. He was previously chairman of the National Council for Palliative Care. Professor Lakhani was awarded a CBE in 2007 for services to medicine. He is ever present, active, dynamic, shaping the healthcare agenda for tomorrow. It is a real pleasure to have him speak with us today. Thank you, Professor Lakhani, for joining us. Professor Lakhani.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for that kind introduction, Tariq. I'm very pleased to be here at this important event. And what I want to do is to kind of set the scene for this collaboration and explain the context of why it's so important. Let me begin by thanking everyone on this call for the work that you're doing. Work during the pandemic is extremely hard, it's challenging. You're working in a very difficult environment, often at a risk to yourself, but you're delivering day in and day out. So thank you very much for everything you've done. And I also want to thank the two premier institutions we have in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, Willows Health and De Montfort University, for your very visible leadership and support for communities during the pandemic. I'm sure you'll agree that we should begin by reflecting and paying a tribute to the 2,000 people who've died from COVID in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. Yes, sadly, we have reached the 2,000 mark, and also 235 healthcare professionals have died from this illness. So we reflect and send our condolences and pay a tribute to each individual. And at this time of crisis, though, we must look to the future. And this is why I think this event is very, very important, because the crisis has presented an opportunity to create a better future and what's called the new normal. And research will be a very important part of that. So I'm a working clinician. I also serve on the National COVID Service. I've probably assessed remotely over 500 patients with acute COVID, and I appreciate the scale of the challenge. But you know, we did most of that work remotely. So as the clinical lead for LLR, we led a piece of work around what should guide our restoration and recovery, the future. And we set out 10 principles or 10 expectations that should define transformation. And one of the principles was around remote first or a digital future. So I'm very proud and pleased to hear of the interest in digital medicine. So the reset will be very, very important. And the setting of LLR is very exciting. You know, often we don't talk about the good things, but during the pandemic, did you know that Glenfield Hospital was the biggest contributor to the principle and recovery trials that established dexamethasone as a life-saving drug? Did you know that everyone who needed critical care or high intensity care received it in hospital? Did you know at one stage there were over 500 people with COVID in our hospitals? And before the pandemic, look at the volume and quality of work we did. 4,000 patients treated in our hospitals every day. 280,000 patients treated in ED every year. 10,000 babies born every year in our area. 450 midwives delivering babies. 28 babies per day, and obviously that has continued. 1 million outpatient clinics in Leicestershire. 100,000 emergency operations. 130,000 surgeries. 1,000 clinical trials. But you'll notice that I'm citing mainly secondary care figures there. Now is the time for primary care, where collectively across the country, 1 million people will see their GP every working day. We have 133 practices in Leicestershire, a population of 1.2 million. For every full-time GP, 4.7 lives are saved every year. This is a rich database, big data, rich number of contacts per day to do research. This is why I welcome this initiative very much. So despite the good things, I'm sure no one on this call can be happy with the quality of care that is currently being delivered. No patients can be happy, GPs, consultants, managers, researchers. Mrs. Patel is 56. She is taken away by an ambulance to hospital because of acute abdominal pain and obstruction. She has a late diagnosis of cancer. Jasmine is 40. She has obesity, learning disability, and diabetes. She doesn't understand how to control her conditions. She declines a COVID vaccination and ultimately dies from COVID. John is 22. He's a young male person with mental illness. He lives alone. He dies from suicide. Raj is 55. He dies suddenly from a heart attack, but he has hypertension and hyperlipidemia, both of which are suboptimally controlled. So you can see these are very big deficits in care. There's a big translation gap. We're much better than that. And this is why I think this partnership between Willows and De Montfort is very exciting. Can I say I believe this is the first such partnership in our area? I'm only aware of 2 other similar partnerships in the country. One is with Lakeside and the other one is with Modality in different parts of the country. So we can solve real world problems by this partnership. So I want to congratulate on what you're doing. So research is important. When I graduated in 1983, I remember working in a peptic ulcer ward, and we used to spend hours doing operations curing peptic ulcers by removing the vagus nerve. Then it was discovered that peptic ulceration is an infection. It's now treated by antibiotics by GPs. And I remember working as a GP, wondering why some people with abdominal pain got suddenly better when they had antibiotics for chest infections. I was never able to fathom that out until this research was published. So there are research questions every day that we come across. I've given you the COVID trial examples, but COVID, which is the world's biggest trial of data using data from 1,250 practices, now gives us a chance to define the shielded population and who would benefit from a COVID vaccination. But I'll tell you an interesting fact here. The average time it takes for research findings to be implemented in practice is 17 years. That is disgraceful. COVID has shown we can do high quality research rapidly, quickly, overcoming governance barriers and red tape where this is not necessary, and implement it. 17 years is far too long. So to conclude, this is a dream partnership in my view. I think it has a huge potential. It has the support of the NHS in Leicestershire. We want it to succeed. We have a very ambitious program of transformation, and research and academic health science partnership is essential. I think with the right vision, partnerships, good governance, topic selection, the sky is the limit. So let me finish on this note and an anecdote. One of my heroes in medicine is Sir William Osler. He's the father of clinical medicine and bedside research. He was professor of medicine at Oxford and essentially came up with the idea of partnerships between universities and healthcare, and hence the idea of teaching hospitals was born, which we now take for granted. But it's taken a long time to come up with the idea of teaching practices or research practices. And this is today something that we can celebrate. So what Osler said at the time in Oxford and his other work, he said, let there be an invasion of hospitals by universities. He meant that in a nice way, because from that came the collaborations that led to the discovery of penicillin and the huge number of treatments we have now because of a collaboration between the service and academia. So today I say, let there be an invasion of general practice by De Montfort University in partnership, in collaboration. I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Lakhani. So much to take away from that 5 minutes, and there's so many things to reflect upon what you've actually shared. Some sobering comments about particularly on those lives who we've lost during this pandemic. And what I felt was most impactful were the short patient narratives you spoke about, which actually gave so much information, which identified those wider determinants of health, which we do need to research so that we can have impactful intervention. And also shows why research is so important to prevent this morbidity and mortality. 17 years is far too long for research to be translated into practice, and COVID has shown we can do this quicker. And one of the aims of this collaboration is to directly implement this research into practice. And I'm confident that we can do this by collaborating with clinicians across LLR and even nationally. And you also spoke about the fantastic change management, which has been demonstrated across LLR and indeed nationally. And it really does demonstrate the resilience that we have shown as a medical unit, but also the speed and change management that has come with the research with the academic institutions. Many of those lives are in the older age groups which we have lost, and from those at-risk groups where the complications of COVID are higher. And so I think that makes it really appropriate to move on to our next speaker, Mr. Eric Killstrom, who has lots of expertise in older people. Mr. Killstrom spots market gaps and builds ecosystems that lead to change across industry, government, third sector, and academia to unlock opportunities that come with aging. Eric was interim director of the Healthy Aging Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, where he led a team to establish a £98 million fund. This focused on closing the yawning gap between healthy life expectancy and life expectancy. He is a former digital transformation strategy executive with a proven track record in delivering impactful innovation to multinational corporations and rapid growth startups. He is the UK ambassador of Aging 2.0, which is a global network of innovators who use technology and design to improve the lives of older adults around the world. He is chairman of Older and sits on the advisory board to the Centre of Primary Care Research. Thank you very much for joining us, Eric.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here. I'd like to echo many of the words that were just said in terms of the potential impact and the opportunity that we have in front of us. So with that, I've prepared a few slides that I'm going to share as we speak. So let me do that quickly, if I may. That should be seen on the screen now. Okay, great. Yeah, so I've been asked to talk about how research can be translated into impactful intervention. So I'm going to share some of my experience in doing that. I think there's a lot to learn from what has happened in the past. And as was just mentioned, I I'm currently a social entrepreneur who am a chairman of many of companies that are looking at the barriers to healthy aging. I come to this role as the former director of the industrial strategy. I'm currently on the expert advisory panel to the Royal Colleges of Art, their Design Age Institute, and very pleased to be here as part of the steering board of the center that we're talking about. As was said by Edison when he was looking to create the light bulb, I'll be sharing lots of things that didn't work as much as what they found did work. So I think there's a lot to learn from experience. The context in which I wanted to talk about today was the framework that I really look at in terms of healthy aging. As was mentioned by Tariq, there is a yawning gap between healthy life expectancy and life expectancy. The Aging Society Grand Challenge really views this through 4 pillars. Those 4 pillars involve financial well-being. You can't worry about the fancy gadgets if you can't fix the broken window or put food on the table. So financial well-being is one of the 4 pillars. Health and care is an obvious one for our particular audience today. Maybe less obvious. We talk about the wider determinants of health. The homes, our family, and our communities have a direct impact on our health and well-being, to the point where 90% of the housing stock in the UK today is not fit for our aging population. So there's lots of work to do around homes, families, and communities. And the work that we do, the volunteering that we do, when we come to retirement, how do we have meaningful purpose to our daily activity, whether it's continuing work, volunteering, or some other thing that we engage with. So the key here that the government was really looking at, and this was announced by Theresa May in 2018, how do we prevent or delay the increasing care needs? We have, if you look at what impacts the health and well-being of an individual, anywhere between 20 and 30% of what a GP says actually has an impact on our health and well-being. These other factors are significant in our health and well-being. So what happens outside really has a big impact on delay and prevention of increasing care needs. From my experience, it really comes from three separate areas. Design, language, and business model are things that are quite important. I really want to talk about design in today's discussion, setting yourselves up for success. This is a standard Royal College of Art approach to design. I won't go into the detail other than to say that it was once said that if you had an hour to solve a problem, you'd spend 55 minutes looking at how to solve the problem, analyzing and understanding the problem, and then 5 minutes actually tackling the problem. And I think that applies in this particular case. There's some statistics that say that 42% of entrepreneurs 42% of all startups fail as a result of not deeply understanding their market and having an appreciation for what the actual issue is to address. And that is in the face of the fact that Design Council research shows that for every £1 spent on design, you actually get a £20 return on that investment. So design matters, and it matters in our particular context. I wanted to share some experience as it relates to NHS test beds, Wave 1, which tested 51 products across 4,000 patients and 8 evaluation teams. Those evaluation teams were across the UK. In particular, I wanted to talk about down in the Surrey area. They looked at the technology integrated health management pilot with University of Surrey, the Alzheimer's Society, and the Kent Surrey Sussex AHSN. They looked at the problem around 1 in 4 hospital beds occupied by a person with dementia. 22% of unplanned admissions are preventable. And the fact that a lot of this dementia is complicated disease with associated comorbidities, which leads to care burnout, and one of the key reasons for care home admission. The pilot looked to address creating actionable clinical data that was focused on improving quality of life for the individual and the carer, and reducing pressure on acute services in NHS. Now, I bring this up because in setting up the research, how do you translate research successfully? The key is understanding where you are in the journey, and RCTs are absolutely fundamental to our success in evidencing the intervention. But if the technology or the solution that you are implementing requires intervention with a complex system, it may not be appropriate to the immediate challenge. It might be something to undertake later. And I mean that in the sense that if you have a complex system, it may lead to increased risk of your pilot and actually set yourselves back in the sense that an RCT as a wrong type of evaluation metric in providing evidence. And I wanted to propose what had worked as a result of this NHS pilot in Surrey. That what they found was that the intervention evolved over time, and there was a real challenge around standardization. And the solution was really around evaluating the process, capturing the complexity of what they were trying to do, mapping the changes over time, and understanding the process of the intervention so that the user experiences could be improved and adapted over time. I won't go into the video that they have. There's some good research resources available on the NHS website. I'll have there's a link to it in the presentation. I really wanted to say that, you know, the finding was that research pluralism is absolutely fundamental, and RCT has its place. But in this particular instance, action research was more appropriate for what they were looking in terms of improving that allowed them to act and reflect. What is action research? Forgive me if I'm speaking to a converted audience. You know, Charles Talek, who's head of NHS evaluation at the time this was happening, I think he's since moved on to the Health Foundation, but at the time Charles was saying action research is quite important, and action research is really a method of facilitating organizational change through collaboration with the researcher and the client. It captures the entire change process, and it's a process that accepts change as a learning process, allows you to evidence the impact and use that as a guide for future developments. It's particularly well focused for a situation where you know the objective, but how you actually get there is difficult. That objective involves a complex system like organizational change and organizational impact. So success is dependent on the interaction between stakeholders. The technology innovation requires organizational changes to achieve those benefits. So those are where it could be best of use. It requires you to plan, act, observe, and reflect, and continue to do that in cycles. It really begins with a theory of change. You baseline the data in relation to the theory of change, and then each cycle you evidence the impact and use that as evidence for the planning of the next cycle, and you continue it through the cycles. So it's iterative, it's evolutionary, it's context specific, systemic, engaging, but most importantly, it allows you to build evidence and continue to develop your solution. So from my perspective, I really wanted to share, from my experience, what happens and how you translate that. And I think RCTs are important, but consider where you are in your development process. And if there is any risk of adding additional risk by the wrong evidence collection, I think, I would ask that you look at action research. So set yourself up for success. Spend time thinking about the appropriate evaluation framework. Design is key to all of this. So engagement to the point of partnerships with all of the stakeholders, including your users. And I wanted to repeat Rish's words around, I think this is how you create practical translation of research. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'll hand back to Tariq. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Really useful to consider all the different factors associated with healthy aging, particularly in the first slide. And it really goes back to this wider determinants of health, which is certainly a political priority for LLR and the integrated health system way of working. And in some respects, there is some relation to Maslow's psychological hierarchy of needs, and it feels strange in this day and age that we have to go back to this to really consider what our older population need. This, I feel, is important because the relationship changes the way people process health beliefs and therefore submit to health behaviors, which increases the risk of conditions which can increase morbidity and mortality. And also fascinating to hear about action research, and this ties in quite nicely with some of the work Dr. Vinay Gupta, GP and clinical director at Willows Health, with Dr. Richard Wong, consultant at Willows Health, are working on with appropriate care planning, which has reduced our patients' length of stay by 40% and reduced inappropriate hospital admissions by 40%. And there was a piece where you spoke about organizational changes we needed to get there. And there was so much change required, including having a team of consultants, GPs, end-of-life care nurses, and PAs going in regularly to fulfill the care home DES. Eric, also, I see, lots of the work that you're doing, you're asking the right questions to solve the right problems, and that seems central to the work you're doing. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for the work that you have done and its great impact it's had on society thus far. And talking about integrated health systems leads nicely on to our final speaker for this afternoon, Professor Bertha Ochieng. Professor Bertha Ochieng, who I've had a privilege of working with over the last few months, is a professor of integrated health and social care at De Montfort University. She has extensive experience of health and social care provision as a clinician, an academic, as a researcher working within community groups and health and social care providers. Her academic and research focus is on improving health and social care through the provision of high-quality education and research that provides positive results to marginalized and socially disadvantaged populations throughout the lifespan. Her work has resulted in collaborations with diverse teams comprising of voluntary sector organizations, academics, NHS trusts, social care teams at local and international level. She's the co-chair for the Centre for Primary Care Research and will take the role as the Centre's director. So Professor Bertha Ochieng, great to have you with us this afternoon.
Thank you very much for that, Tari. Yeah. Good afternoon, colleagues. I feel very privileged actually to be here with you this afternoon and to also be a co-director for this new Centre for Primary Care Research launch day today. It's quite a unique centre, as you've heard from my colleagues, Professor David Mba, Professor Rish Prasad, and our other two eloquent and excellent speakers who've already talked about some of the work that we'll be doing in the centre. In my presentation, I'll provide just a brief overview of some of the centre's ambitions, the centre's aims and objectives, and also just a feel of some of the projects that we are currently doing, and also in terms of the pipelines that we have of the number of projects that we are aspiring to be doing within the next few months, the next 12 months or so. Thank you. So just to start, if we can go to the next slide, please. So the centre strives itself towards very much focusing on patients and healthcare-driven research that is able to provide a solid evidence base that can directly be translated into practice. We have seen in terms of COVID has been a wake-up call for each one of us within our health and social care, and the importance of research that is focused, its impact, not just on healthcare providers, but also on the communities that we work with. And for that reason, this centre is also aspiring to put forward innovative approaches and technology to improve healthcare quality, access, and efficiency within the diverse communities that we work with. In fact, the notion of technology is quite important and has come alive within health and social care, given the COVID situation and the pandemic and the resultant social distancing and lockdown that we are now experiencing. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to share now some of the aims and objectives of the centre. They're quite broad, and this slide is just to provide you with a feel and an insight into what we are looking at. And as soon as, the further information is actually going to be available within the centre's website. So one of the key objectives and aims that we'll be looking at is to draw on current expertise on healthy aging. And the uniqueness of this is that unique opportunity that we have with having academics, researchers, and clinicians on the ground working together in focusing on healthy aging. We are also looking at delivering a joint research strategy that supports the design and implementation of research into clinical practice. So this will not just be researchers or academics speaking with themselves, as sometimes we do, but speaking directly and in collaboration with our clinical colleagues. And this centre provides us that unique opportunity. Another objective for us is to apply for grants and other funding to drive the wider adoption of care solutions and technologies that will improve care. Technology has been something that even within the NHS long-term plan is something that we can see has been raised as an area that the NHS and healthcare has got to be adopting moving forward. We are also looking at creating teaching opportunities to develop the next generation of clinicians and allied health professionals within this center as part of our aims and objectives. Next slide, please. So in this particular slide, I just want to provide you with an overview of some of the projects that we are already doing and some of the projects that we are actually aspiring to do. So examples of some of the current projects that are in progress. We very much started just a month ago a digital health and technology program that focuses on individuals, older adults who are at home, and how we manage them in terms of getting an insight into their care needs. And I'll speak slightly more about that in my next slides. Mental health has also been a core interest for us. And this follows on some previous work that we did looking at long-term conditions, and nearly 33% of the individuals that we tracked, and there was about, I think, 1,200, had an underlying mental health condition, in addition to other long-term infections, like illnesses like diabetes, and also illnesses like hypertension. And the majority of them were also from our diverse community. So we'll be looking at a mental health project, looking at what's their care needs. Are we making sure that we are meeting those particular care needs, given where we are now also with the pandemic and the social isolation, which has brought to the forefront the mental and mental well-being of individuals. And then the other work that we are looking at is some of the work that you've had my colleagues being mentioned, Dr. Richard Wong and Dr. Vine, and also with Paul Hausman, who have implemented within the Willows the John Hopkins Toolkit, which is an excellent and fabulous toolkit in terms of identifying the care of individuals within the end-of-life care. And some of the examples of future projects that we'll be looking at, and for some of these, we've actually submitted bids for funding. Asthma care is also at the top of our agenda, and this also has come up as a real underlying clinical condition that is important for us to be focusing on. We are also looking at diabetes management. Nearly 33 or 40, about 30% of individuals within Leicester and Leicestershire have either got a cardiovascular related illness that is also related to diabetes. So diabetes management and the care that we offer individuals who live with diabetes is critical for us in terms of researching that area. And of course, COVID and dental health. There's quite a lot of work that is ongoing with regards to COVID, and there's some research that is now telling us that there's a link between oral health and COVID. And that's an area that we will also be looking at exploring as areas of future research. Once again, these are just an examples of some of the future projects that we are looking at, and there's others that we will be very happy to talk about depending on the questions that come through. So if we go to the next slide now. So in this particular slide, this is the example of one of the work that is ongoing, which is looking at remote monitoring technology of using smart meters. We're actually working with a company that we started working with about 18 months ago. And this piece of work is an extension of that pilot work that was completed. So in this particular piece of work, what we will be looking at, some of the key research questions are, can a smart meter app monitoring the electricity usage of older adults detect anomalies that can relate to significant health needs? Within Leicester and Leicestershire, one of the areas that we've also been seeing is that there's a real queue of loneliness that brings in the underlying issues to do with mental health, and also because of individuals living by themselves and also with other underlying conditions. Therefore, monitoring them and looking at their electricity usage, we hope will provide us with an insight of some of their clinical needs. So these are just some of the key research questions that we are looking at in terms of moving this forward. And also is the ability to monitor the daily living activities of housebound older adults remotely and non-intrusively, acceptable to them and their carers or their next of kin. And can a smart meter app that monitors electricity usage help identify unmet care needs in the older population, allowing timely care intervention? So this piece of work has already started. And in the next slide, if we move to the next slide, please. Yeah. We are in the process of recruiting, with support from our colleagues at Willows, about 100 older adults who already will be having smart meter apps within their homes, and working with their house sensors, we will start tracking them. And that's where we are going to be using both a qualitative and quantitative data. As a health and social care practitioner, I'm always interested in hearing those voices and stories of patients, especially during research, and how we incorporate those. And for that reason, we will be having semi-structured interviews with the older adults participants or their carers, and also from their GPs also who have used their house app in their patients' assessment. We just want to see how technology can enhance the care that clinicians are offering through this particular project. The project has also been supported by, we are working in collaboration with the East Midlands Academy of Health Sciences. It's very much still at the beginning stage of this project, and we are very much excited in some of the data that we believe will be coming out as part of the work that we are doing within the center. And again, for some of my colleagues from CAM who are working with us on this, we are tracking the number of alerts that the app will be able to be providing us and how those particular alerts relate to GP intervention. So that's just a synopsis of some of the work that we'll be doing with this particular project. We hope that we will be able to share the findings of the project at a later date as the work progresses. Thank you. If you can move to the next slide, please. So in this particular project, this is an assessment of the Johns Hopkins tool that our clinical colleagues within the Willows Health have been using now for some months. And what the team has done, they've adopted the mortality risk score that was developed by Johns Hopkins to generate a new algorithm from outputs that actually enables them to support individuals in their end-of-life care. And the Willows team have recently completed a review in which the team adopted the population health management approach, in which patients potentially nearing the end of their lives were identified using this mortality risk score and given the appropriate care and support. So as part of the center, we identified that there's some further research that needs to be undertaken, comparing the effectiveness and applicability of this tool compared to the traditional methods of prognostication. So this is another exciting piece of work that the center is looking at. On the next slide, please. So we are looking at undertaking a retrospective audit. How does the MRS tool from Johns Hopkins, in terms of its use of ease and efficacy for it, compared to traditional methods in identifying a near end-of-life population? From the pilot work that has been done, one can almost even hint to the fact that it's foolproof in identifying the needs of the end-of-life patients. And where it has not been identified also as end-of-life patients, the use of this particular toolkit has been able to provide the clinicians information to enable them and to allow them to provide more timely and more appropriate care intervention. So within our retrospective audit, what we will be looking at is how do practitioners in the field feel about using the MRS toolkit and implementing it as a standard form within the clinical work that they are doing, and also introducing dignity at that particular end-of-life care. So these are just some of the examples of two projects that the center, which is still about, I believe, just about 2 months old, is already embarking on. And as Professor Prasad had said and Professor Mba, it's how we make that particular health and social care not just good, but even better. And the unique collaboration that we have of clinicians and academics and also researchers and communities also working together with this particular center is an insight and an aspiration of the research that we will be developing as we move forward. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Bertha. And Professor Ching, it's been great to have those perspectives of the types of work we're doing at the Research Centre. And it's really positive, and I was just reflecting as we're speaking, that we've been running all of these projects even before the launch. And I think that's real positive in terms of the direction of travel we're heading in. Some of this work we're doing really comes from where our values at the center lie. And I think it's clear for us to see that it's the value which then allows us to determine our research priorities. So thank you very much to Professor Lakhani, to Eric, to Bertha, Professor Ochieng, for those really reflective perspectives. And what I want to do now is go to a few salient questions that arise as a result of the content presented. But before we do that, I just think it's important to recognize the contributions of individuals who do not feature in this launch, but are actively contributing to the center and have allowed the foundation to be built. And this list isn't exhaustive, but we have Professor Mohammed Roshan, who's a professor of medicine, who sits on the advisory board, who is an advisory member. Thank you to him for all the work he's been doing, and tremendous support there with lots of research experience. They're not named on this list, but I should mention also the two other directors at Willows, Professor Fahad Rizvi, who worked with the Physician Associate School at Montfort University, and Dr. Avinashi Prasad, without whose support we would not be able to commit the time that we're doing to this research center. So thank you very much. Over the last few months, we have been privileged to have Dr. Richard Wong join us. He's been instrumental and integral to the work we're doing at Willows, particularly within the older people's unit. There's so much wisdom and experience there, and we're really privileged to have him on the operational steer. And I think his perspectives are going to be vital for us to establish research priorities. Thanks to Kieran, who's the Chief Information Officer at Willows, who's really helped us to dive into the data we have from our patients, and to Paul, to Kavita for actually putting everything together, and to Dewey to really sort of work as a research assistant with the DMU, to Rachel, who's the Executive Officer, to the Pro-Vice Chancellor's Office, and also to all of our colleagues on the DMU side, so Professor Abis Amira, Associate Dean, Dr. Sarah Malone, Dr. Shivanti Samarasinghe, who's actually formed the Antimicrobial Stewardship Steering Group for Primary Care for the Willows Group, to Dr. Moses Sakumbi, to Stephen Kelly, to Dr. Ioannis Kyprios, to Dr. Hussein Malik Mohammadi, and Dr. Fabio Carafini. And it could be that I've missed a few people. I'm so sorry if that's the case. But thank you very much to everybody who's working hard with the center. And we really look forward to bringing those perspectives of those experts on board into the operational steer. So we're going to move on to a really short Q&A set just for a few minutes. So we're going to bring the panel together and ask a few questions. So this is so exciting. Even though we're working on lots of bits, I've got no idea how we're going to prioritize the research agenda. Bertha, how are we going to prioritize what we're going to work on? There's so much work to do.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Kapasi. It's really something that we've been reflecting with as a team, because we've had quite a number of invites now and areas for us to be looking at, and other teams that want to work with us. But when we've had these discussions, one of the things that we've been looking at is prioritizing the areas of need. You know, we've got this unique opportunity of the particular database that we have working with the Willows Health. So prioritizing the areas of need and the timelessness of it is really important for us. And then other key things that we are looking at is what the funders and funding opportunities are available at that particular time. Because we may have a need, but there's no funding opportunity. So that is critical for us also. The team's availability and expertise is also quite important in terms of where we are looking, what those areas are. And of course, something like COVID has even given us, in terms of the urgency of some of the work that we want to be looking at. So that's just a nutshell of the discussions that we have when we are trying to identify, okay, what should we be looking at this particular time? And the intelligence that we get from our colleagues, the clinicians, is really important for us, because once you identify something from our clinical colleagues, That means that its implementation and its translation into practice, the pathway is already created there. Yeah. Thank you.
And thanks both. And I think for me, that's the most exciting thing, that we can look at a problem, identify the salient research question, come up with a solution, and then implement that solution directly with the patient cohort we have. Very much going back to Mayor's case studies, and really short snapshot case studies, reveals so much about risk factors for morbidity and mortality, and also the wider determinants of health. And I think that translation, which is really, really key. And I just want to go back to how COVID might shape the research agenda. And there's lots of work being done with respect to health inequalities and so on and so forth. Bertha, how do you think coronavirus is going to be changing the research agenda? And I think Mayor might have some interesting perspective on this. So we'll go to Mayor after Bertha.
I think there's a few things that COVID has taught us, in particular the use of technology within health and social care, where in the beginning there was almost a reticence of using technology and implementing technology within health and social care. The COVID has given us that opportunity to actually bring alive the NHS long-term document that was implemented last year. So that's something that COVID has also told us. And then the other thing that COVID has also done is actually bring into light the inequalities in health that clinicians and researchers have been talking about for years now. That has brought it out into perspectives. And while COVID is a leveling, because COVID has got not, in terms of it doesn't discriminate who it's going to infect, so to speak. But we also see that within the outcomes of COVID, there are huge inequalities across the board. So COVID is once again is really asking us to look at the systems that we have in place within the health and social care and how we make sure that some of those structural inequalities are addressed, because we find that the ones who suffer the most are the ones who actually the health inequalities as already highlighted in previous documents of about 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Yeah. So I'll pass over to Dr. Lakhani. Yeah.
And to Mayor, again, the same question, how does coronavirus shape the research agenda? And I think you alluded to it in your talk. So it would just be fantastic to have a few more perspectives.
Yeah, so speaking from a local NHS leader for the system, I think there's 2 or 3 things that are worrying us at the moment. One is the aftermath of the pandemic and how we open up. It's called restoration and recovery. There'll be thousands of people waiting for care, operations, but also reviews. But many people sadly will have lost their job, will have been bereaved. We'll be dealing with broken societies. How do we heal that? And if you look at where we started with before, so this problem has existed before COVID, is essentially we have what we want to get to as a health service is empowered patients. It's called patient activation. I'm sure you'll agree that generally the balance of power lies too much with doctors and nurses and the service. What we want is patients to be in charge of their own health and their conditions, and to be smart about using technology. So could we create that culture change around active patients? Now, we don't know how to do that fully and how you'd evaluate that. So I think that's one research agenda, making patients more than partners, actually, in activation. The other thing is just, and I know DMU has a very strong interest in workforce, is the well-being of workforce. People are exhausted, they're burnt out, right? I don't want a situation where, the pandemic ends one day and then the next day it's like working 24/7 to clear waiting lists and to clear the reviews in primary care. How do we nurture, this phrase, happy doctors, happy nurses, happy midwives equals happy patients? People were not happy before. They're even less happy now. COVID has brought us together. So I think one research agenda is around well-being or joy at work. That's a very good thing. The third thing, which, as the NHS is very interested in, is the variation in practice. We can produce you data now of the gaps between best practice and what people are actually achieving. What's stopping that change? And I think education and training is key in that. So basically, these are kind of the real problems we're facing that I hope that research will help us, in addition to pure research, of course, the aging population, the John Hopkins tools, etc.
Thank you, Mail, for those reflections. So last question. I know we've got many healthcare and academic leaders on this call. So what impact do leaders of collaboration want to see, Professor Ambar?
Thanks, Tariq. I think for me, there's a couple of things I'd like to say. I suppose the first one, given the history of the university and the fact that we've been having an impact regionally and locally, is this continuation of this impact. What can we do in our wonderfully diverse city of Leicester to kind of level up and address those disparities that we alluded to earlier on? I suppose also for my academic colleagues, Bertha made reference to a particular project on the smart meter, which involved colleagues who have expertise in artificial intelligence, potentially could involve colleagues in psychology. So it's to give also my academic colleagues the chance to put their practice, to put their research into practice, and to work with this center to see how quickly we can advance and bring to the fore some of those research ideas. As Mayor mentioned earlier on, 17 years, my word, it's such a long time. So what can we do collectively to accelerate that process? So for me, it's really those two key things from my point of view, from the university's point of view.
Thanks, David. So really, really useful thoughts there. So we're running a little bit short of time, so we're going to go to final statements. And just a final concluding statement from our panelists before we tie up. So, Bertha, any final sort of concluding statements from your perspective?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. I think there's quite a bit of noise.
Any final perspectives from your end, Bertha? Any concluding remarks?
Yes, I'm actually really delighted with the new center, because this actually brings into perspective some of the work that we had already started doing about 2 years ago with the team, and having a unique center such as this particular one within the city is very exciting, and very much looking forward to working with others going forward. Yeah.
Thanks, Beth. We'll go to Eric.
Yeah, thank you. And again, congratulations on getting this up and off the ground. Really exciting opportunity that we have in front of us. And there was something that Dr. Lakhani had said that I'd love to reiterate. You talked about getting patients engaged in their own health and well-being, and I really want to highlight that as an opportunity here. I think we need individuals to be in charge of their own health. This isn't something done to people. This is done with people. And I think that's the fundamental framing that we need to have here. So really encourage everyone to get actively involved and have that framing, because I think this is an amazing opportunity. Thanks again to be a part of it.
Thank you, Eric. And we'll move on to Mayor.
Yeah, so I want to wish you all the best. I think this is a very important development for LLR. Our vision is to be one of the best, if not the best, health and care systems in the UK. I think we've had a lot of legacy issues, and the way out of this is actually through research, innovation, and transformation, all the things we've talked about. A specific impact I'd be looking for is we're building a new maternity hospital and children's hospital. I want perinatal mortality to be one of the lowest in the country. It's not at the moment. These are preventable factors, antenatal care, the medical conditions that women have, the GPs can do a lot to improve. So the metrics must move, the potential is huge. So I'm very excited, and congratulations to everybody for making this happen.
Thanks, Mayor. And finally, we'll go to Rishad.
It's hard to follow Mayor Lakhani on anything really. Although the centre is badged Willows and DMU, I rather see this relationship as holding the ring for a wider health community. So this absolutely isn't an exclusive Willows and DMU piece. And what I'd really open is invite my colleagues from different organisations to feed in, because none of us in this room here have a monopoly on great ideas for research and great ideas of what we should and shouldn't be doing. So I'd invite all of my colleagues across health and academia to get in touch with Darek and Bertha, and really, as Mayu said, let's improve care locally and further beyond.
Thank you, Rishad. And just a final point, I'm hearing things where we really need to empower our patients, and we go by the 3 E's, and we say, let's engage patients, let's educate them, and let's empower them. And the NHS and academia model needs to be inclusive, and I think this is one of those steps to doing that. Thank you very much for joining us during this launch. We're really excited to work collaboratively to improve ultimately the lives of the patients whom we serve, not just locally, nationally, and perhaps internationally. We look forward to collaborating with you all to deliver the aims and ultimately the mission of the centre. So thank you to our speakers, thank you to our steering board, but most of all, thanks to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.